In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas. The first reports say that President Kennedy has been seriously wounded by this shooting.
As both sides seek to invoke the wonders of science instead of its terrors, together let us explore the stars, conquer the deserts, eradicate disease, tap the ocean depth, and encourage the arts and commerce. Let both sides unite to heed in all corners of the earth the command of Isaiah to undo the heavy burdens and let the oppressed go free.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
If you're too young to know or remember 11/22/63, it was the 9/11 of the 60s. 3 shots that changed America. The assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the President of the United States at the time. If you don't know much about this event, I suggest that you study up on it because it was a date that darkened American history. Now, this book, 11/22/63, was written by Stephen King, and it's about time travel. Not only time travel, but a love story, mystery, action, and suspense novel contained within 850 some odd pages. Our protagonist is Jake Epping, an English teacher divorced from an alcoholic wife. The beginning of the book, his GED students had to write an essay about something in their life that changed them, for better or worse. One of his students, a mentally challenged individual, wrote about how his dad murdered his entire family with a hammer. Now, this information comes into play in a minute. Jake has a friend, and his name is Al Templeton, who owns a diner. One day out of the blue, Jake finds out Al has cancer and only a few days to live. Now, this was a shocker because Al had always been in good health. And then bam, out of the blue, the big C. Al eventually invites Jake to his diner to reveal that he has a wormhole in his storage room and that it leads to 1958. Now let me stop here and explain the time travel rules so you and I won't get confused. Once you go through the wormhole, you land at the same place the diner was in 1958. When you come back through the wormhole in 2014, only 2 minutes have passed. If you decide to go back to the wormhole to 1958, everything resets, regardless of how many hours, months, or years have passed. So what Al had done is spent 4 years of his life from 1958 to 1962. And when he came back to 2014, only 2 minutes have passed. This explains why Al aged 4 years and came back with cancer. So basically, every time you go to 1958 via the wormhole, everything resets, regardless what you changed in 1958 and on. If you changed something and then came back and wanted that change to stick, you had to stay in the present and never go back to the past via the wormhole. Otherwise, if you made a second trip through the wormhole, boom, reset, everything goes back to the way it was in 1958. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, Al explained to Jake that he was going to save JFK from being assassinated, but he got sick. He came down with cancer and had to come back to 2014 for medical treatment. So he basically couldn't finish the job. So he wants to recruit Jake. Recruit him to go back to 1958 and stop the assassination. Well, Jake is skeptical, but he says, why not? Let's test it out. He goes through the wormhole, and remember that kid who wrote an essay about his father murdering his family with a hammer? You guessed it, Jake saved that family, and returns to 2014 just to see if the changes stuck. And they did. Now Jake is convinced. So he plans to go back to the wormhole, save the family again, and stop the JFK assassination. But remember, JFK wasn't assassinated until 1963. So basically, Jake has to spend from 1958 all the way to 1963, which is 5 years. So basically, he has to bum around until the moment of truth. What to do? Well, just like Back to the Future, Jake has a sports almanac and uses that to make small bets with bookies here and there to make ends meet. And this works for a while, but he gets kind of bored. So he decides to make up a fictitious name, George Amberson, and begins to teach again. Now, while he does this, a lot of shit happens, but the main thing is he falls in love with a librarian named Sadie. She has an estranged husband that basically dumped her and never filed for divorce. So Jake, now George, and Sadie are sneaking around in 1958. But basically as in love as two people can get. Okay, now I know this is a long book and a lot of shit happens. But the main thing is Sadie's estranged husband stalks her, finds out that she's sleeping with George, slashes Sadie's face so bad that it leaves her disfigured to all hell. And then Sadie's husband basically commits suicide. Okay, so now Sadie is all fucked up, and plastic surgery was kind of unheard of in 1958, but as you guessed it, not in 2014. So Jake, now George, finally comes clean and tells Sadie that he's from the future. She doesn't believe it, of course, but he proves it to her by taking her to a few sporting events and telling her the outcome. She finally comes around. And then he tells her his plan of stopping the JFK assassination. And then he wants her to come back with him to 2014 and get her face fixed. Now she accepts, but she's still a little bit hesitant. Now all the while this shit is going on, Jake has rented a place right across the street from the Oswalds. He has their house bugged and he listens to every word that they say. He makes a trip back and forth from Dallas to wherever he was in Texas, I can't remember, and he lies to his friends telling them that he's working on a novel, and of course they buy it. Stephen King describes Oswald so hauntingly accurate. It gave me chills when Jake, now George, actually has an encounter with him. King did so much research on this book that it would probably make anyone's ass pucker. And this isn't a conspiracy novel by any means, so if you're looking for that kind of novel, this ain't it. It sticks to the premise that Oswald was basically the lone shooter, and it does it with amazing historical accuracy. And I have to give credit to King because he fucking nailed this one, even describing how Dallas was at this time. And trust me, he didn't do any favors for people living there through his descriptions. Okay, so now after all this has happened, Jake basically makes the wrong bet with the wrong people on a boxing match. He scored big, but the bookies are skeptical and want to kick the living shit out of him. Even though Jake makes small bets here and there to look like he's losing, to try to fake it, they don't buy it. The gig is up. And the bookies pretty much find him and kick the living shit out of him days before he's supposed to save JFK from being assassinated. They fuck him up so much that he develops narcolepsy over this. It kind of probably causes a little brain damage. Okay, so now Sadie offers to help stop Oswald in the final pages, but she ends up getting shot by Oswald instead of JFK, and yes, she dies. Well, fuck. So now Jake pretty much has to explain to the FBI why he was so suspicious over Oswald in the first place. And this part is true, by the way, because the FBI were supposed to be keeping tabs on Oswald because they pretty much knew everything about it and they dropped the fucking ball. So the FBI becomes a little spooked over Jake because he knows so much. And especially now since Jake is a national hero and he saved the president and lost his girlfriend. Even JFK and Jackie call him while he's being interrogated by the FBI to thank him for saving the president. In the end, they let Jake go. So in the end, Jake says, fuck it, I'm gonna go back to the wormhole and then come back to 1958 to reset everything and do this shit all over again just to save Sadie because he was so madly in love with her and she was worth it. Now when Jake travels back to, you guessed it, Maine, which is pretty much every place that Stephen King writes about in every one of his fucking novels, well, guess what happened? Well, I could spoil this shit or just tell you to go read the fucking book yourself, or I could say fuck spoilers and tell you that nuclear bombs had went off. They went off in several states. Canada now owned Maine, and there had been an earthquake knocking California off the fucking map, and everything was a big fucking mess in 2014. All because he saved JFK. And Jake instantly knew that he was just a drop in the bucket of time. Don't go fucking with shit bigger than yourself. So he goes back to 1958, through the portal, and everything resets. But this time he stops himself. He doesn't go back to Sadie. He doesn't do shit, because he knows that if he changes even the slightest of things, it will have consequences. Just like the butterfly effect. So he decides to leave things be. Keep in mind, Jake just lost 5 years of his life that he spent with Sadie. So he comes back to 2014, and the wormhole finally closes. Because Alan Jake has pretty much used the wormhole too many times already. It's created too many alternate realities, kind of like strings on a guitar. And he'll never be able to get that time back. All he has now is memories. And keep in mind, only 2 minutes have passed in 2014, even though he spent 5 years in 1958 to 1963. Jake is now 5 years older. He does look up Sadie in 2014, and now she's 80 years old. He finds out that she's doing fine and is being awarded something at the high school she used to teach at. And of course, nobody remembers Jake from that time because remember, he went back to the portal and reset everything. But he still goes to visit her. And when he does, she's very old. Her body's given away, her hair's white, skin wrinkly. And remember, she has no idea who he is. But he takes her hand and he asks her with a tear in his eye if he can have one last dance. Now, this book has a bigger meaning than just JFK, than time travel, than mystery or suspense. What I got out of this book is that our time is precious. And once you lose it, you'll never get it back. Spend every waking minute in this life as if it were your last. Now, a lot of people got mad with this book because it didn't go into the whole details of time travel or paradoxes or woulda, coulda, shouldas, or even the conspiracy behind the JFK assassination, if there was a conspiracy. And I think a lot of critics missed the major point of this book, and it's that time is fleeting. Jake spent 5 years in the past that he'll never be able to get back. 5 years in bliss with a woman that he fell madly in love with. And the lesson is learned the hard way. I mean, Jake will always be 5 years older than what his driver's license says he is. He'll never get that back. And neither will the years that we've spent in our present time. Which is why it's such a great story. To remind us that Jackie can't get her husband back, just like Jake can't get the woman he loved back. It's lost. Cherish what you have now and savor all the time that you get, because time is truly precious. Now, I've read several Stephen King books, but this one is probably one of his best. This is way better than The Stand. I know a lot of people that have read The Stand have a problem with the ending, but I'm telling you, Stephen King really nailed it with this one. And I'm not an authority on the prose of a writer, but to me, reading is like looking at a painting. And the more clear that you can see and understand that painting, the better the book. And I think this could be one of his masterpieces that he's ever written. And The Stand, to me, this pales in comparison. So if you're looking for a good read, I could not stop reading this book. I had to read it in, I think, 2 days. And yeah, it's worth every penny. It's a great book, and it'll have you questioning things. I've been thinking about this book for weeks after I had read it, about what time means to us. So if you're interested in reading, if you like to read, it's about 850 pages, but like I said, it didn't feel like that when I was reading. Actually, I thought it ended rather early, and much better than The Stand. It's not a horror novel, but it's probably one of the best books I've read this year. Peace.